Hey, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Rising Tide Leadership Podcast. My name is Mo, and I'll be sitting in the host chair today. I have a very special guest I would like to introduce you to, Stephanie Craig, who is the president of Kith, a crisis communications firm that equips leaders to show up with confidence when the stakes are high and the pressure's on. With years of experience guiding organizations through turbulent times, Stephanie brings a rare mix of empathy, strategy, and foresight. From corporate missteps to reputational threats, she's worked with the leaders navigating complex scenarios that could easily derail trust and performance. But instead, she helps those clients to help turn around those moments into defining leadership opportunities. So today, we're diving into how preparedness, clarity, and communication aren't just crisis tools, they are essential traits to great leadership. Stephanie, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I am thrilled to be here to talk all things crisis and crisis leadership.
Yes, ma'am. Well, I know when people hear the word crisis, they probably tense up a little bit. And so I'm glad you're on the show because, as a person who deals with a lot of leaders, that's what we as leaders do. We deal in crisis, or I think, as you mentioned a little bit before we started, hiccups or anything in between. So, Stephanie, why don't you tell my audience a little bit about yourself, the journey, and how you've gotten to where you are today?
Absolutely. So I have, as my mom used to say, I've been through every kind of natural disaster except a tsunami. And I choose not to stroke that one off the list because I just don't think I need to. I've seen enough of it. I'm good. I come from a long line of folks that ran towards real bullets. I run towards idea bullets. My grandfather stormed Normandy, and my father was a Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer. And so they're the guys with the red jackets and the big hats. And they're a little bit like the military. They're police, but they're a little bit like the military. So I moved around a lot. I was born in the Canadian Arctic, which is as wild and woolly as it sounds, and have been moving south ever since. But it really becomes a personality trait when you have all these different experiences. So I grew up kind of all over the place, went to college. I graduated college by in the middle of a devastating flood at the University of North Dakota. One of my sorority sisters was shaking my toe and said, "Hey, Steph, wake up. Grand Forks is flooded. University's canceled, and congratulations, you just graduated."
Just like that.
Just like that. And it just kind of crystallized. Some of those moments that just crystallize the path you're supposed to be on. And I am one of those folks that is very calm in the middle of chaos, and I know that that is kind of makes me a little strange. I am the person that kind of hangs out in the corner at parties because I need to know where all the exits are just in case. And that kind of those traits really led me into politics because that was campaigning and politics. So those were the moments that helped kind of feed that charge that I get from being in the middle of crisis. And so I may be the only person that that's ever worked in the US House and Senate and the Canadian House and Senate. So I have a really long line of political experience and across the border. But it's each of these experiences led me to believe that yes, you can, be in the middle of a crisis and you can manage it and you can recover from it. But it's also taught me that you can also prepare for it. And that's what our firm is really focusing on now. We obviously, if anyone needs kind of any sort of crisis response, we always pick up the phone. But our evangelizing comes into we want people to prepare for crisis, both as a physical, a fire, CFO absconding with your pension plan, those types of things, but also the reputational impacts of those. And so all of the experiences working through these houses of government, campaign trail, I did some corporate turnarounds, led me to believe that crisis preparation, regardless of what kind of organization you have, is possible and helps you make a very, very, very bad day better.
Like most people, leaders, we would love to avoid crisis, but you had mentioned we need to recognize that it can happen and it can happen at any moment, any moment. And preparing for it is the mark of sophisticated leadership. Why is that mindset so important for today's leaders?
And it's I think there's another category to leadership in crisis. It's the it will never happen to me, and I'm going to stick my head in the ground, and it is never going to happen to me.
Isn't that what we call delusional leadership, Stephanie?
It is generally, yeah. But what's so interesting is that those are the people that usually end up calling me at 3 o'clock in the morning
Hmm.
because it is like I don't
Yeah.
think I know a single leader that has never had some kind of crisis. And crisis is unique to every organization because a crisis to somebody is not a crisis to somebody else. So understanding your own risks and your own potential threats is that's a critically important part of preparing for it. The the leaders of organizations that are thoughtful, that know they need to invest in crisis preparation and prioritize it within their leadership team, they do so much better. Their stocks are better. Their board is happier. I think one of the things that we've really noticed is that uh, organizational boards, and for a lot of folks that probably understand leadership, it's the idea of this over leadership, this non revenue side of leadership. They've actually taken a big interest in preventing crisis for their companies. And so the folks that are really successful understand that you need to look at the bad days and figure out how to go through them. And something that you and I share, you're from one side, I'm from the other, is that you used to coach student athletes. I used to be a competitive figure skater. And,
Yes. Cool.
and something that I think you will resonate with you in particular is when you are a figure skater, and I think a lot of other athletes do this, I mentally walked through my program all the time
Absolutely.
because that is how you pinpoint where you are going to stumble and how do you manage for that. How do you mentally manage for that? And that's a leadership mindset concept that works well as an athlete, works well. I think if you, for swimmers, if you're doing a long distance in particular, how are you going to manage that? You're a runner. How are you going to manage a really long race? You do it because you know where the hills are, you know where the valleys are, you know where you can coast, you know where you can't. And when it's the same when you're running an organization, if you can figure out what your biggest threats are, what your worst day would look like, and then prepare for how do two things: mitigate and try to prevent what's going to go wrong, and then try to prepare for when it does. And it literally is that mental, that getting to that place that people don't really want to go. They don't like to think about bad days. It's our very nature not to want to think about bad days. But I have a very personal example of I've done this my entire life. Like I started becoming a competitive figure skater when I was 10 years old. Obviously not very good. I didn't make it. Uh, and so, but that whole concept has really served me well. And something very personally, both of my parents passed away a few years ago in very quick succession. I am an only child. And the idea of walking through this world without my parents was almost unfathomable. But I also knew that so my mom passed away, and we immediately after found out my dad was sick. And so I knew that not only would I be, my world would be shaken, but I also knew that every responsibility of a parent passing fell to me. So I mentally prepared myself for, how what's it going to look like when my dad passes away? How am I going to feel when he passes away? And there's a concept in it that's called pre-grieving, and it's very similar to that mental preparedness to going through it. So when the time came, I think the interesting thing for me was I didn't realize until it happened that I'd been standing there like I was on the edge of a cliff with my eyes closed, waiting for someone to push me off. But because I had mentally worked through it and mentally kind of saw myself doing that, I'm not going to lie to you. If you've lost a parent, it is an earth-shaking thing. But because I had walked myself through what truly was one of the worst days of my life, it was easier to manage, and it was easier for me to mentally work through because I'd already done it. I'd already mentally prepared myself. Do I miss my parents? Absolutely. I won the parent lottery. But they did the same thing. My dad was a hostage negotiator.
Wow.
Very nice skill, very bad as a parent to a teenager, I might add. But that was something that he had done as well. You have to walk through these things. And so while, we don't want people to have their very worst professional day, we're not counselors. I couldn't even begin to work with folks that are having their worst personal day. Those are really, truly special people. But when you're working through your very worst professional day, if you've done this work, this is not something that I talk about in a way that is abstract. I've had to do it, and it has worked. And so if you can do this, if you can summon the courage to work through your worst days, you are going to be better for it. And that, as a leadership quality, it trickles down through your organization. And that leadership has to be there when you are talking about creating a culture of crisis preparedness. Because if the leadership team is not bought in, if the leadership team doesn't want to walk through their worst day, the rest of the company is not going to do it, because they feel like it's futile for them to do it, because there's not going to be wholesale change.
So for those decision makers, the leaders, the people sitting at the senior table, how do you recommend leaders start building crisis readiness into their leadership rhythm?
Well, so there's a couple of things that I would recommend right off the bat. As a leader, you have to raise it to the rest of your team. If you are smart enough to already have a communications person sitting at your leadership table, they will probably be nodding their head vigorously. There is no other job in any organization besides a communications person that their sole responsibility is to protect the reputation of the organization. And this is something that is gaining more traction, but not a lot of people know. An organization's reputation is 35% of their value. Think about that. If you have a factory that's worth 50% of your value, the other 35% is the reputation of the product you create in that factory. And so that sort of recognition that you want to protect this is important. Funding it, making sure that there are line items in your budget to do preparation exercises, to do analytical exercises of looking into the nooks and crannies of your organization to find out where the crisis can happen. And then I would recommend creating a core crisis team. And that is 6 to 8 people that have one of two qualities: subject matter expertise or decision making authority. And the best teams have people on them that have both. And so that team is the one that gets the warning. They're the ones that make the decisions. And communications is usually on it, legal is usually on it, depending on company, IT or HR, CFO. Those are the folks that usually sit on it. And you'll notice I didn't say CEO.
Yeah.
The reason for that is it depends on your organization. We work with a university that their president is a big personality. And if she were sitting in the room during these discussions and these recommendation sessions, she's an 800-pound gorilla. And her thumb on the scale, I can't believe I just added all of those things together, those buzz. If she's to be there, she will influence
Yeah.
the outcome. And so what we did with them is we said, okay, this team needs to come up with 2 options, and then you go to her. But your expertise has to come up with the options. So that's a culture question. That's a culture of, is your CEO part of the team and an equal weight in decision making, or are they outsized? And you need to find a way to account for it. And another kind of interesting dynamic to this is I want to make sure that people understand the difference between brand and reputation. So brand is what you pay for. It is your logo, it is your marketing, it is your spokes squirrel. It is all of those things. Your reputation is what people think of you, and that is owned by your stakeholders.
Before we got on this call, I went to your website, kith.co, for my listeners. You'll want to do the same. And I took the assessment, which was a quick assessment, and saw whether or not I was ready with my company for crisis and crisis management. And when you mentioned the 35% figure, that blew me away. I didn't know how important that was. And I think a lot of leaders, they don't know either. And so I really hope that that for my listeners, take that assessment. It will blow your mind and let you know where you're at and what you need to work on and what you can get better at. Stephanie, I had a question about spotting the storm before it hits. What are some common types of crises that you see on an everyday basis that business leaders should be watching for right now?
Well, like I said, they're different for every type of organization. And some where we're seeing a lot, if I had to bucket them, I would say they fall a lot of HR, a lot of crises come out of HR, a lot of crises come out of IT, and then there's what we call social crisis, social risk, and that's actually diminishing, quite honestly, as we have a proliferation of communication tools. That if you know your stakeholders and you know who they trust, where they learn, and how they talk, then you don't have to worry about the whole symphony of voices out there. You have to worry about those folks. So that's where social risk really comes from. It comes from kind of external forces and societal forces. And then I would say the HR and IT are really some of the highest areas. And I kind of, there's two examples that I want to give. One is of a company. We worked with a global company in the natural resource sector. And I think I've made an enemy for life because during our breakdown of what we had just done, I asked the head of IT, well, what's your ransomware insurance? And he goes, what do you mean? I said, well, what does your ransomware insurance say? And he just goes, well, I don't know. And I guess I'm not a good poker player. My emotions show on my face. So I was a bit shocked. And I said, "Well, do you know, like, are you supposed to pay? Are you not supposed to pay? Can you talk about it? Are you not supposed to talk about it? Do you know the different reporting requirements of the various countries you're in?" And then the little visual daggers started coming because the CEO was on the call. And he goes, "Do we know those things?" But in the moment of a ransomware attack, it is not the time to be asking, what is the data breach policy of Ireland? And on a flip side of that, we work with a client that they have done all the right things. We've been working with them for years to make sure that their crisis mitigation and spotting and planning is spot on. And so it was the Thursday night before the Friday before Veterans Day weekend. And their payroll provider came to them and said, we're not going to be able to deliver payroll to you tomorrow. And they're a government contractor. So as you can imagine, a large number of their employee base are veterans.
Yeah.
Veterans not getting paid on Veterans Day weekend. And while they were really mad, they didn't have any hesitation of what they were going to do because they knew what their values were. They knew who their most important stakeholders were. Their stakeholders were their employees. And so there was no way they weren't going to pay them. And because they knew their stakeholders, their employees, they knew that their employees would receive an email. They prefer to receive information via email, but they want to talk to someone via telephone. They won't communicate via email. They'll want to call you. So they prepared an email and they set up a 1-800 number. And in that email, they said, listen, this has happened. We know it's a tough time because it was the pay period, like right after, the first of the month, the mortgage and the student loans and all those
Yeah.
things. And if anybody cannot make it, we promise you, you will be paid on Tuesday. And if anybody cannot make it through the weekend, call this number and we will 2,600 employees, 12 of them called, 12 of them called, and they worked with them, right?
Yeah.
They figured it out and they had the reserve, right? Because they knew that there would be a rainy day, so they had the reserve. And then this really remarkable thing happened. 3 months later, they surveyed all their employees. Employee satisfaction went up.
Hmm.
Employee retention went up. Recruitment went up because they had knew what they were going to do. They knew what their values were, and then they also knew what that they could talk to their stakeholders, where they needed to talk, how they needed to talk to them. So they could act fast, and it's actually turned into a benefit. And that's, I think, one thing that leaders don't understand is that there is actually, I don't want to say benefits for crisis, but there are positives coming out of crisis. And this is one example.
I love hearing both sides. So when a potential crisis is brewing, then How can a leader evaluate whether to act immediately or to take a measured approach? Is there a formula for that?
Well, there is, in to a certain extent, but I would also say that it comes from learning. We have an exercise which we call smoke versus fire, and things that seem to be a crisis but aren't. A
Yeah.
bad tweet, or I guess it's not called a tweet anymore. A bad X, and from somebody that doesn't matter to you, that's smoke. You're not being able to pay your employees. That is fire.
Got it.
So that it's not really a formula, but it's taking a holistic look at what your risks are, what you're doing, who's important to you, because those types of things that are good decision making points, and things honestly that you should be making beforehand. That answering the questions that are important to decision making shouldn't be happening in the moment. There are a lot of things that you should already have answered. So, who are your most important people? And if they're upset, that is a crisis. If somebody that's not your important people are upset, probably not a crisis. If you are a very heavily regulated business, the people that regulate you being upset, problem. The people that, armchair quarterbacks, probably not. If you're a publicly traded company, the armchair quarterbacks are important. So this is why you have to take a look at your own risks and figure out everybody that is a stakeholder in your world. You can't just say, well, my customers are. Well, yeah, maybe they are. But are they your most important? Are they going to have the biggest impact on your business? It's important questions to ask, because you need to know. You can't just guess that these people are the most important. You need to have the conversations and you need to know. So when we think about formulas around that, we have placed a parameter around it. We call it clarity plus trust equals strategic speed. And we say strategic speed as opposed to just speed, because if you've built the clarity and built the trust, you're not just responding willy-nilly in every which way. You know how to respond in a measured, thoughtful way that isn't alarming because you've done all the work. So the clarity on what your values are and who matters to you. When I talk about values, um, our government contractor, one of their top values was transparency with their employees and treating their employees like they own part of the company. So when they were decision making, it was absolutely spot on. There was no question that they were paying them. And so understanding your values and then also living your values in your company will help you mitigate, and in life, honestly, will help you mitigate any kind of crisis. As long as you're true as a company or an organization to your core values and they permeate everything, that you don't just talk about them in your marketing, or you don't just talk about them in a press release, you live them in HR. They show up in your job postings. They show up in how you organize your board. And when you're doing your personal life, same thing. I think living your values is something that really translates to mitigating crisis across the board, individual or organizational. And then I've talked a lot about knowing who matters to you, and then knowing what matters to them.
When we talk about stakeholders, whether they be employees, clients, third parties, the people that we care and should care about what they think for whatever reason, how does the leader serve to build a bridge between all of those parties? Because everybody's got a different reason as a stakeholder, and the leader's got to juggle all of it. So what does he or she do?
Well, they may not have all of those people. Part of the exercise in looking at your stakeholders is figuring out how to prioritize them and then building bridges of communication. You just can't communicate with these people when there's a problem or when you want to sell something. It's it's like when you go to look for new clients, for instance. You can't just show up one day and be like, "Hey, I would like you to buy $25,000 stuff." No, yeah. And that's the same with a leader and their stakeholders. Figure out what they need, figure out how and where they communicate, and honestly, who they trust. We're having a very big crisis of trust in this country, of authority, and it differs quite frankly, with your age, with your socioeconomic place, with your political ideology. So you need to figure out those things about your key stakeholders, because you need to understand who they are going to trust when you deliver information to them. That's a real key ingredient to that. But also at the same time, there are going to be overlapping characteristics of your key stakeholders. Like, if say your employees, if you've hired the right people, employees are a stakeholder group, and your regulators are a stakeholder group. They're likely, the employees are vested in having you succeed. So they're going to want to make sure that the regulators are happy. So understanding how that ecosystem works, and then understanding how you need to communicate with all of these folks, and small c communicate. It's a long exercise. It's not something you can wake up on a Monday and be like, I think I'm gonna do this afternoon. It has to plan. It is months long as you get to know them. Do some demographic investigation. Understand buying. Like, there's so many ways people can understand people buying habits, where they live, what sports teams they support, what kind of education level, all these different pieces of information that factor in to, not granular. You can't know what Stephanie thinks, and you know what Bob thinks, and you can't get that far, but you can kind of take it out and figure out, okay, well, as a group, this is likely what they care about. This is likely who they trust, because like constant kind of congregates with like.
I'd like to go back to talking about culture. You mentioned that a little bit earlier on in the podcast. You often emphasize the importance of embedding crisis readiness into company culture. I
Mhm.
love that. What does that actually look like in practice?
So the other part of the equation is trust. And it's trust in the people, procedures, and policies that you've put in place beforehand, that they're going to work in a time of crisis. And that comes from creating a culture. I'm actually in the process of editing a blog that somebody on my team wrote. And it talks about dusting off a plan. And I thought, we don't even use that anymore, because a culture of crisis readiness means that you practice regularly. People know their job. People know that other people know their job, so they can trust them, that they're going to do what they need to. And so as people walk through, like, I don't want people sitting at their desk twiddling their thumbs being like, okay, is that a crisis? Is that a crisis? Is that a crisis?
Right.
They've had enough training, they've had enough communication to understand, okay, I'm doing my job, I'm doing my job. That's a crisis. Who do I need to call? So it's building a culture that knows it can happen. And when we talk about that leadership, right? Acknowledging that bad days can happen. Everybody else goes, you're right, bad days can happen. And I know what the precursor to that bad day are going to be. So I can spot them. Okay. So I'm sitting here working at my desk. I see that. That doesn't seem to be good. I'm an expert in what I do, and I know that's not right. I'm going to tell somebody about it. And so off they go, and they know who to talk to. And that person is probably the person that can go, yeah, that's not a crisis. That's kind of smoke. Or that's a crisis. They know who to go to. And they're not hemming, and they're not hawing, and they're not kind of twiddling their fingers if this is a crisis or if this is not a crisis, because they've had the training to know that it is.
Right.
And that kind of when I say culture, it's the idea of being vigilant and the idea of being ready. More than anything, it's
Mm.
the idea of being ready and wanting to do those preparations, wanting to invest in being ready. That's the culture, as opposed to that bad day will never happen. So I'm not gonna worry about it. And if you are culture A, you are having fewer sleepless nights. If you are culture B, we're talking at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Right. Yeah, it reminds me of when I was a kid and we used to go through the earthquake drills. And when we heard the bell go off, we all knew exactly what to do. There was always a door monitor. The people got under their desk. The teacher was supposed to do something. We were trained. Is that kind of what we're talking about here?
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully not, not quite as life threatening.
Yeah, I hope not.
Yes, but absolutely. You know what to do. You don't think about, I might, but you don't generally think about, okay, an earthquake is going to maybe come today. An earthquake is going to maybe come today. When you hear the siren, you know that it's an earthquake,
Right. You've been
and you know
trained.
what to do. Right.
Yeah. And it also sounds to me, Stephanie, that it's about buy-in. That's what I hear. That when an employee, a team member goes to whoever they're supposed to say, is this smoke or fire? That's them buying in, knowing, hey, my company cares about my opinions and my thoughts, and I don't need to decide if it's smoke or fire. Me as an employee or a team member, when I do that and my voice is heard, I'm going to buy in.
Absolutely. I love that. That's absolutely true. And one thing that we tell our clients, and we actually do a free little Substack if people are interested, is to hold up your industry publication at your next staff meeting and say, what would we do if this happened to us? And it doesn't require a big, super huge simulation, which I do recommend a big simulation at some point, but it doesn't require that. It's small companies can do that. Hold this up and say, what would we do? Could be a phone, could be an iPad, could be your newspaper, whatever genre of media you're using, just hold it up. And I mentioned that we do a free little Substack, and it's called Crisis of the Month. The original working title was Oh Crap, but we figured that wasn't as marketable as Crisis of the Month. And so it really is just there's never any sales pitch. It is a situation, 3 questions, 3 pieces of 3 resources, and it'll always be free. So people are more than welcome to come in and sign up for it, and it is just to help people get thinking about preparing.
Oh, that sounds like a great first step for any organization, large, small, nonprofit, to start incorporating something like that. Stephanie, is there any other accessible steps that you would tell a leader out there, whether they have one employee or they have 1,000? Hey, you might want to start incorporating this to start thinking about these things we've been talking about today.
I think the 2 things, regardless of size, what are your values? Who are your stakeholders? And then mindset of preparing.
I love that. We talk a lot about that here, and I know my audience is getting a ton out of this. So, Stephanie, on my podcast, I usually give Mo's final thoughts, but when I have a guest on, I always give them the last word. So, Stephanie, what are your final thoughts?
I love talking about this. I think it's a really critically important thing for folks to do for any organization, because people work hard. People work hard on building their companies, on building their organizations, and they don't just do it on a whim. So please just protect it. It takes, to quote our old friend Warren Buffett, it takes 25 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to lose it.
Oof.
So please just invest a little bit. Even if you just sign up for our little Substack or find me on LinkedIn, I am happy to just keep talking about this any chance I get.
Stephanie, where can my audience find you on social media?
I'm just Stephanie Craig on LinkedIn. And that's pretty much the only social media I do, because otherwise Instagram's for puppies and so.
Those puppies are cute, though. So
They are.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure we put that link in the show description. Stephanie, thank you so much for your wisdom. It's clear that leadership isn't just about being ready in the good times, but it's being ready to show up when it matters most. To our listeners, if you found our episode today valuable, make sure that you like, subscribe, and share. And don't forget to sign up for our newsletter, where we give you a ton of good stuff every month. Stephanie, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.